The Atacama Desert lay before them, as it is, long and dry and motionless under a universe of stars. The atmosphere was dry and piercing, bearing with it the slightest scent of dust and distant minerals. The flame spat and cracked, its yellowish glow jumping against the black silhouettes of rocks surrounding them on every side. Jose poured a steaming cup of coffee from the pot, and the aroma blended with the bitter odor of burned wood. She sat cross-legged with a blanket covering her legs, her gaze upturned. "See that?" she whispered, pointing towards the Milky Way, a brilliant streak glazing through the heavens. "No light, no sound, just us and the universe." Diego, the group's self-proclaimed skeptic, rested back against his pack, sipping on his drink. "And a whole lot of nothing. Seriously, this is the closest to Mars on Earth. Maybe that's why everyone keeps saying something out here," Marcos jumped in, grinning. "Aliens, strange lights, people disappearing."
Jose laughed. "Right, and then you're going to give us a lesson on the desert goblins your abuela threatened you with. Come on, some of these things date back millennia," Marcos countered. "Pre-Columbian myths, fossilized petroglyphs, the Atacama's steeped in history, man." Lucia shivered slightly, but the fire warmed them up. Something about the desert, its quiet, its vastness, made her feel like they were being watched, like they were exposed. But that was her imagination, right? A gust rushed over, sending a cloud of powdery dust to stagger the flame. For one moment, the friends were all in perfect silence, and heard. There was never really quiet in the desert, either distant rustle of wind through dunes or single intake of air against the stone. And then to one side of them, something changed. A light. It was weak at first, barely discernible from the stars, but it was moving too fast, too unpredictably. Lucia frowned. "Did you see that?"
The others glanced up toward the sky. The light zigzagged, then ceased, then flashed away in a velocity that was impossible, disappearing over the horizon. Then again, the fire burst again, more loudly, but no one spoke. Suddenly a thudding boom, a low, raw one, as though the sky itself had exploded. Its force rolled through the ground, making the metal coffee cups slam against the rocks. The air vibrated in through their skin. Jose had brief moments to struggle to his feet, before Lucia drew a shocked breath and jabbed a finger into the air, pointing to the sky as 3 large red orbs dropped out of the sky. They weren't falling like meteors or dying like flares. They seemed to hang with intent, but moving very slow, deliberate, unnatural. Their light pulsed in a heavy, gloomy pace, as if what was inside them was alive. Each pulse transmitted a low, electrical buzz through the atmosphere, causing Jose's hairs to stand on end. "What the?" Diego gasped, his voice just above the strange crackling power building up around them. The orbs drifted precariously over the desert, bathing the sand in a feeble red sheen, and then, responding to some command that none might hear, they drifted toward the distant mountain spire, an older, jagged range that stood untouched for millennia. Out of nothingness above descended something vast and metallic, a shape too large to be grasped at first, its curves rippling against the blackness, distorting the stars as it descended, in absolute silence. A huge saucer, easily 100 meters in diameter, its surface smooth and unbroken, reflecting the fierce light of the orbs that lay below. It did not descend like a plane. It appeared as if it had been there all along, waiting just beyond the edge of human perception. The moment it completely revealed itself, the night changed, the flames died out, the air became tough, dark and charged. Every breath was bitter with metal, every nerve screaming with an unfindable fear. The desert, which had pulsed with susurrations of wind and distant insects, was now utterly, unbelievably silent.
Lucia held Jose's arm tight, her fingers paralyzed. "Guys," she breathed, "we have to leave." But none of them moved, for deep in their bones, they knew it had already seen them. Lucia gazed at him, her eyes wide. "Go? Go where?" He waved towards the mountain, the massive black form looming in the distance. It wasn't an outcrop of rock and dust. In the spooky red light, its form was unmistakable. It wasn't natural. It was a pyramid. "We have to go see it for ourselves," Marcos whispered. Lucia shook her head. "Are you insane? We have to get as far away from here as possible." But Jose already knew the truth. They weren't leaving. Something, whether it was fate, fear, or something far more sinister, had already claimed them. Slow, laboring steps they took to gather their gear and move toward the mountain, flashlights cutting small beams into the shifting sand. The night was utterly still, no bugs, no wind, only a distant thrumming of the ship still in the air behind them. As they neared the base of the mountain, the man-made shape of the building became increasingly visible. Its sides were too even, too smooth, weathered by years but undeniably made. Lucia touched the stone. "This is not a mountain." Then Diego stepped up and yelled, "Over here." They had turned to continue on when they saw him crouched at the bottom, his light shining upon a jagged crack in the stone. It was no such crack as would be found naturally. It was an opening, a narrow path, barely visible, leading down. Jose took a step closer, peering into the darkness. The walls inside were inscribed, carved with symbols, fuzzy but deliberate. This was no cave. It was an entrance, and something was waiting inside. The rock fissure was abnormally neat, a tunnel that shouldn't be. Diego hesitated before stepping inside, his light sweeping the inside. The others followed him, their steps repeating its sounds off rock. That was far too polished to be a natural cavern, and then they saw the megalithic rocks. Massive, utterly massive slabs made up what seemed to be an ancient temple entrance long lost to time. Each block fit together with pinpoint accuracy, without a speck of mortar connecting them, far too accurate to have been produced by ancient tooling. The structure loomed in the faint illumination of their lanterns, half buried under ages and centuries of dust. Lucia ran one hand over a block, fingers trembling. These must weigh tons. How on earth did they transport them here? Jose swallowed hard. He recalled the old myths, the legends of the beasts that shaped the earth before humankind had even set foot upon it. The stillness between them had almost been unbreathable. The ship bobbed in the distance, its unnatural existence warping the very life around it. The spheres below it glowed in slow, rhythmic waves, reflecting out ill yellow lights across the sand. Jose swallowed. Her heart thumped, but her mind was coming back to something, an old story, something his abuelo used to tell about this mountain. This mountain. His voice was rough, hardly a whisper. "It has stories around it." Lucia stared at him, her eyes wide with indignation. "What kind of stories?" Jose willed himself not to look away from the craft, the unthinkable looming shadow that had invaded their world. "There are stories told of the earth beneath our feet, that there's something buried deep down, that men have heard whispers, seen flashes of light in the air. Some think it to be an old civilization. Others," he cleared his throat, his mouth parched. "Others say that it's not human." Diego let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. "Oh, come on, not now, Jose." Jose turned to him, his expression grave. "I'm serious. The Atacama is full of stories, petroglyphs of strange figures, old myths about tunnels that lead to places that aren't supposed to exist. The elders say the mountain is a doorway." "To what?" Marcos asked. Jose breathed deeply. "Something that was here before us." An uncomfortable silence fell. The fire went out, the air full of static. Then Diego sneered and crossed his arms. "This is crap. Look around. You think it's fairy tales now? We just saw a 100-meter diameter flying saucer appear from nowhere, and you want to talk about folklore?" He laughed, but it was a strained laugh. It was tense. "This is just advanced military technology, something real." He shivered. It wasn't fear, it was cold. The temperature had dropped sharply. The deeper they went, the more the warmth of the desert night vanished, replaced by a creeping underground chill. Their breath began to mist in the beams of their flashlights. "This doesn't make sense," Marcos muttered. "We're in the middle of the driest desert in the world. Why is it this cold?" The tunnel opened downward in a gentle slope. The walls cracked and scored with deep grooves, like whatever had created it had scraped it out with enormous tools. It resembled some kind of ancient mine shaft, but the deeper they descended, the more things didn't seem right. The oxygen was getting stuffy, pressing on them with an invisible force. Every step further forward was like pushing oneself into a place where they didn't belong. Then, ahead of them, a light, far but shining, as a faint luminescence at the entrance of the tunnel. It was not trembling like fire's glare, nor did it caper like sparkles. It was fixed, unmoving, unreal. Lucia grasped Jose's arm. She was saying almost inaudibly, "Say that is the exit." Jose could not. For deep in his stomach, he knew the real horror lay just beyond that light. The walls of the tunnel had closed in on them, the cold gripping like a vice on their lungs. Each step toward the light at the end was a crawling into the unknown. Then, all at once, the tunnel opened out. Jose took a step forward, fearing as they stood at the edge of an impossible space. The room stretched out of sight, so enormous their flashlights barely reached the far edges. The ambiance was thicker here, heavier, charged as if the sheer density of time collapsed upon this place. Their footsteps echoed interminably, swallowed up by sheer expanse, but it wasn't the enormity by itself that curled their stomachs with terror. It was what rested at its core, a pyramid, not a stone structure, but something far more otherworldly, a black glass-like monolith that seemed to draw the light around it in. Its surface was smooth but strangely natural, as if it had grown rather than been built. Marcos approached cautiously, the beam of his flashlight reflecting off the building's smooth surface. "What in the world is this?" Lucia's head shook, her voice hardly above a whisper. "This can't be real." It was. Jose felt something deep in his bones, a primal scream that this pyramid was not meant to be seen by humans. It had been there a long, long time before them, before the Incas, before the first people who lived in the Atacama, before history itself. Then, on the other side of the pyramid, something stirred. A shadow. No, not a shadow, a craft. Hanging suspended in the distance, hovering in the huge expanse of the room, was the same saucer they'd seen in the sky. Silent, immovable, waiting. To be looking at it here below the ground, below the earth where no ship should be able to fly, gave them the shivers. Lucia panted. "How is it even moving?" No one responded. For at that moment something far worse happened. The pyramid reacted like a sleeping animal. Suddenly, it was coming towards them. That low rumble of the black pyramid vibrated through the hairs of Jose, a thing not felt but heard. It screamed through every part of him to run, but his body would not move. Then, without thinking, he stepped forward, and the ground beneath him gave way. His foot slipped on loose rocks, and in an instant, he was falling. The world turned around him as he tumbled down a rocky incline, jagged rocks tearing at his clothes, burning pain unfolding along his arms and ribs. His flashlight spun wildly, its beam cutting mad arcs through the darkness before it rebounded into the depths below. "Jose!" Lucia's scream rumbled through the cavern. His body slammed against the ground. Pain exploded in his side. He gasped, trying to move, but his leg throbbed twisted wrong. He was trapped. High above, the others scrambled to the edge, their flashlights casting frantic beams down toward him. "Stay there," Marcos shouted. "We'll find a way down." But Jose barely heard him, because something else was happening. The three red spheres which had floated indolently above the cave started to stir. Their pulsating light picked up speed, shifting from a slow, menacing rhythm to something demented. The air was charged with a low, crackling buzz, static electricity gathering like an oncoming storm. The spheres weren't just reacting, they were alive. "Hey," Jose rasped, his tone barely above a whisper. "Something's not right." The spheres started to descend towards him, slowly at first, then more and more rapidly. Their light intensified, sending weird, contorted shadows across the cavern walls. Heat radiated from their bodies, bending the air like a desert mirage. Lucia's terrified cry came from above. "We have to get him out of there." Jose gritted his teeth, struggling to force himself up, but his leg buckled. No going up, no going out. Then, the orb ceased right in front of him, just meters away, floating above him. A deafening, blinding crack shattered the serenity. The cavern erupted with light. A searing, blinding flash of white consumed everything. Jose's screams were eaten by the emptiness, then sudden silence, a piercing sound ringing through Jose's head. For an instant, there was only white, then shapes, shadows moving in the haze. The blinding light faded, reduced to a soft, pulsating glow. Jose gasped, his breathing ragged, body locked in position. The orbs were nowhere to be found, but in their stead were three figures, tall, imposing, humanoid, but not human. Their skin was smooth, a bluish white, almost translucent, like their shapes weren't quite stuck to the actual world. Their heads were long and bald and lipless and earless, just eyes, massive, black and bottomless, with a burning red light blazing deep in their centers. Jose's breath halted. The more he stared, the more he felt something pressing against his head. Not words, not sounds, pressure. A presence, as if they weren't staring at him but through him. His limbs refused to move. His body wouldn't react. Paralyzed. The creatures did not move, watching. Then one moved forward. Jose winced. The movement was too smooth, too controlled, unnatural, like a marionette on strings. The other two had moved in step, advancing in perfect coordination. Jose's gaze dropped. Every creature bore a metallic band around its wrist, its face inscribed with odd symbols. The bands were glowing with dim blue light, the same artificial sheen which still clung to the cavern walls. What were they? Were they the builders of the pyramid, the watchers of the mountain, or something worse? Jose's heartbeat pounded against his ribs. Still, the figures came closer. Their aura was overwhelming, ancient, immeasurable, suffocating. Their presence alone was wrong. Jose sucked in a sharp breath and screamed. The sound boomed through the cavern, but the entities didn't stop. They didn't even react. They just kept coming. And in that moment, Jose knew there was no escape. Jose's scream faded into the cavern's vast emptiness. His breath came in sharp gasps, his pulse hammering in his ears. The three entities stood before him, unmoving, their elongated forms barely tethered to reality. Their enormous black eyes burned with a light that wasn't light at all. It was something deeper, something ancient. Then, without moving their mouths, a voice spoke. No, not a voice. Thoughts, images, waves of understanding that bypassed language entirely. You are not meant to be afraid. Jose's body, though still paralyzed, no longer trembled in terror. Something about their presence was overwhelming, but not entirely hostile. The air around him pulsed as if the very molecules had been charged with some invisible force. We are the keepers of the lost knowledge, the architects of the hidden past. What you call gravity, we have transcended. What you call energy, we command. The knowledge of the ancients was given to your kind long ago. But it was stolen, buried, hidden from you. Images flooded his mind, too fast to process. Colossal structures, floating monoliths, energy fields bending space itself. He saw glimpses of temples, of pyramids humming with power, of civilizations thriving on forces beyond human comprehension. Then, an abrupt shift. Flashes of modern cities, skyscrapers looming under stormy skies. He saw hands signing secret documents, men in suits conspiring in dimly lit rooms, vast organizations suppressing, controlling, ensuring the world remained blind. The deep state of your world has erased what was once known. They fear what you may become, the power to shape matter, to travel without limits, to break the barriers of time itself. This was meant for all. But it has been hoarded by the few. Jose's mind ached with the weight of their knowledge. It wasn't just information, it was pure, unfiltered understanding. He felt equations unraveling before him, glimpses of blueprints forming in his consciousness. Anti-gravity propulsion, unlimited energy sources, the foundation of what mankind had once wielded and lost. You must return this knowledge to your kind. The time of secrecy ends. Jose gasped as the orbs above the entities pulsed violently. The cavern was alive with energy now, the walls vibrating with unseen force. A burst of static rippled through the air, and with a sudden, blinding flash, the entities vanished. No sound, no movement. Just gone. The next moment, Jose and his friends stood outside the megalithic monument, the freezing desert air rushing against their skin. The sky above was still, the mysterious ship nowhere to be seen. They were back at the base of the mountain, as if the entire experience had been a dream. But Jose knew better. His mind still burned with the knowledge, every formula, every mechanism, every lost secret ingrained within him. Lucia clutched his arm, her face pale. What just happened? Jose turned to them, his expression unreadable. They showed me everything. Diego shook his head, still dazed. What do you mean everything? I mean everything. Anti-gravity, scalar energy, unlimited power sources, things that could change the world forever. And the worst part? We were meant to have this all along. Marcos exhaled sharply, rubbing his face. That's insane. If you really know all of this, what do we do now? Jose didn't hesitate. We release it. Every blueprint, every piece of information. But we can't do it through normal channels. The entire system is designed to suppress this. We go underground. Lucia's eyes widened. The dark web? Jose nodded. It's the only place they won't be able to track us immediately. Mainstream platforms are monitored, censored. But if we upload the files to encrypted networks, spread them to hackers, researchers, rogue scientists, people who know what to do with it, then they can't stop it. The truth will spread like wildfire. The weight of his words settled over the group. They knew the risk. Once this knowledge was out, they would be hunted. But deep in his core, Jose understood. There was no going back. The world deserved the truth. Under the canopy of endless stars, they made their way back toward civilization. But Jose wasn't thinking about the journey back. He was already seeing the future, a future where humanity broke free from its imposed limitations. And the world, whether it was ready or not, was about to change forever.